Welcome back to another incredible story. If you're new here, this channel brings you powerful emotional narratives every week. Stories about family, secrets, and the choices that change everything. Subscribe now so you never miss an upload. Trust me, today's story will leave you speechless. Let's begin. Sarah Mitchell's hands trembled as she zipped her suitcase shut, knowing this was the moment that would change everything. At 32, she had never imagined herself fleeing across continents with a man she'd known for only 3 months. But Marcus Chen had awakened something in her that felt like destiny. The corporate lawyer from Boston had spent her entire adult life playing by the rules, winning cases through careful preparation and meticulous attention to detail. But now, she was abandoning everything for a man who promised her freedom from the suffocating expectations of her family's law dynasty. Marcus had swept into her life during a business conference in New York, his easy charm and mysterious background making him irresistible in ways she couldn't quite articulate. He worked in international consulting, he'd said, traveling constantly between Dubai, London, and various Middle Eastern cities. When he'd whispered that he needed to leave the country quickly and wanted her to come with him to Jordan, where he had a villa overlooking the Dead Sea, she'd hesitated for exactly 48 hours before saying yes. Her mother would be devastated, her father furious, and her colleagues at Morrison and Associates would think she'd lost her mind. But Sarah had spent 3 decades being the perfect daughter, the perfect student, the perfect lawyer, and she was exhausted. Marcus represented everything her carefully constructed life wasn't: spontaneous, adventurous, passionate, and delightfully unpredictable. As she took one last look at her brownstone apartment in Boston's Back Bay, she wondered if she was making the biggest mistake of her life, or finally starting to live it. The taxi arrived at 2 in the morning, just as Marcus had instructed, and within hours they were boarding a flight to Amman via Istanbul. Marcus had purchased their tickets in cash, which struck Sarah as odd but not alarming enough to question. He explained that he preferred to keep his travels off the grid due to the sensitive nature of his consulting work, and she'd accepted this explanation because she wanted to believe him. The flight was long, giving Sarah plenty of time to study the man sitting beside her in first class. Marcus was 41, 9 years her senior, with dark hair graying slightly at the temples and eyes that seemed to change color depending on the light. He was handsome in an understated way, the kind of man who could blend into any crowd or command attention in a room depending on his choice. He spoke 4 languages fluently, she'd discovered, and seemed to know something about everything from ancient history to modern politics. During the layover in Istanbul, Marcus excused himself for what he said would be a quick phone call, leaving Sarah alone at a cafe with their carry-on bags. She sipped Turkish coffee and watched travelers rushing past, feeling both exhilarated and terrified by what she'd done. When curiosity got the better of her, she unzipped Marcus's leather bag slightly, telling herself she just wanted to find some gum or a phone charger. Instead, her fingers brushed against something stiff and rectangular. She pulled out a passport, assuming it was Marcus's. But when she opened it, the photograph was definitely him. Yet the name read, David Richardson, with a British stamp. Her heart began to race as she dug deeper into the bag's interior pocket, finding 2 more passports. One identified him as Marco Rossi from Italy, and another as Martin Schmidt from Germany. Each passport was genuine-looking, complete with entry and exit stamps from dozens of countries, and each bore Marcus's face with slight variations in hair and facial hair. Sarah's legal training kicked in immediately, her mind racing through possibilities. Multiple passports meant either he was working for a government agency involved in international crime, or running from something so serious that he needed multiple identities. She quickly shoved the passports back into the bag, zipping it just as Marcus returned with 2 bottles of water and a smile that now seemed loaded with secrets. "Ready for the final leg?" he asked, seemingly unaware that she'd just discovered his cache of identities. Sarah nodded, unable to form words, her mind spinning with questions she was suddenly afraid to ask. The flight to Amman was torture. She sat rigidly in her seat, pretending to sleep while her thoughts raced. Who was Marcus Chen, or whatever his real name was? Why did he need so many identities? And most importantly, what had she gotten herself into by running away with him? Part of her wanted to confront him immediately, to demand answers, but another part feared what those answers might be. If he was dangerous, confronting him at 30,000 feet over the Mediterranean seemed unwise. If he was working for some intelligence agency, asking questions might put her in danger. And if he was simply a criminal, she'd just become an accessory to whatever crimes he'd committed by fleeing the country with him. She decided to wait, to observe, to use her lawyer's instincts to gather information before making any accusations. When they landed in Amman, the heat hit them like a wall despite the late hour. Marcus guided her through customs with the ease of someone who'd done this hundreds of times, using the passport that identified him as Marcus Chen, American citizen. Sarah watched the customs officer stamp it without suspicion, wondering how many times he'd entered Jordan under different names. They collected their luggage and found a driver waiting with a sign reading Chen, who loaded their bags into a sleek black Mercedes. The drive to the Dead Sea took nearly an hour, winding down roads that descended below sea level, the lowest point on Earth. Marcus held her hand in the back seat, pointing out landmarks and sharing facts about Jordan's history, seemingly relaxed and genuine. But Sarah couldn't stop seeing those passports in her mind, each one a different identity, each one a potential lie. The villa was stunning, perched on a hillside with panoramic views of the Dead Sea glowing under the moon. It was modern and luxurious, with floor-to-ceiling windows, marble floors, and furniture that looked like it belonged in an architectural magazine. "I bought this place 5 years ago," Marcus explained as they entered. "It's my sanctuary when the world gets too complicated." Sarah wanted to ask how an international consultant could afford such a property, but she bit her tongue. The villa had 3 bedrooms, an infinity pool, and a terrace that seemed to float over the ancient sea. Despite her suspicions and fear, Sarah couldn't help but be awed by the beauty of it all. Marcus opened a bottle of wine, and they sat on the terrace, watching the lights of Israel and Palestine twinkling across the water. "I know you must have questions," he said suddenly, his voice low and serious. Sarah's heart stopped. Had he noticed her going through his bag? "Questions about what?" she asked carefully. "About why we left so suddenly. About my work. About why I chose you to bring here." He turned to face her, his expression unreadable in the moonlight. "I need you to trust me for a little while longer, Sarah. There are things I want to tell you, things I need to tell you, but the timing has to be right. Can you give me that?" Every instinct told her to demand answers immediately, but she found herself nodding. Perhaps it was the exhaustion from travel, or the intoxicating beauty of their surroundings, or the way Marcus looked at her like she was the most important person in his world. "Okay," she whispered. "But not too long, Marcus. I gave up everything to be here with you." "I know," he said, pulling her close. "And I promise you won't regret it." The first few days in Jordan passed in a surreal blur. Marcus took her to Petra, where they walked through the ancient city, carved into rose-red cliffs, and she momentarily forgot about the passports while marveling at the treasury's magnificent facade. They floated in the Dead Sea's impossibly buoyant waters, covering themselves in mineral-rich mud and laughing like teenagers. They explored Amman's bustling markets, where Marcus bargained in fluent Arabic with vendors selling spices, textiles, and jewelry. He was attentive and romantic, cooking elaborate meals in the villa's gourmet kitchen and making love to her with an intensity that made her forget her doubts. But at night, when he thought she was sleeping, Sarah would hear him on the phone, speaking in languages she didn't understand, his voice tense and urgent. She noticed he always kept his phone locked and never left it unattended. One afternoon, while Marcus was swimming, Sarah decided she needed answers. She found his laptop in the bedroom, protected by a password, but years of dealing with digital evidence in legal cases had taught her a few tricks. She tried his birthday, then variations of it, but nothing worked. She was about to give up when she noticed a small notebook tucked into the nightstand drawer. Inside were what appeared to be account numbers, dates, and codes that meant nothing to her. But one page caught her attention, a list of names, all variations of Marcus, David, Marco, and Martin, each with different nationalities and dates next to them. At the bottom of the page, written in neat handwriting, was a name she didn't recognize: Viktor Kozlov, Moscow, active. Before she could photograph the page with her phone, she heard Marcus's footsteps on the stairs. She shoved the notebook back into the drawer and pretended to be looking for her sunglasses when he entered, dripping wet from the pool. "Find what you were looking for?" he asked, and she couldn't tell if there was suspicion in his voice or if she was projecting her own guilt. "Just my sunglasses," she lied, holding up the pair she'd grabbed from the dresser. That evening, Marcus announced they were going to dinner at a restaurant in Madaba, a town famous for its Byzantine mosaics. Sarah dressed carefully, wearing a modest dress, appropriate for the conservative culture, her mind working overtime to make sense of what she'd discovered. During dinner at a rooftop restaurant overlooking the town's ancient churches, Marcus seemed distracted, checking his phone repeatedly. "Is everything okay?" Sarah asked, pushing her mezze around her plate. "There's a situation with a client," he said vaguely. "Nothing for you to worry about." But she was worried, increasingly so with each passing day. That night she woke to find Marcus's side of the bed empty. She heard voices coming from downstairs, so she crept to the top of the staircase and listened. Marcus was speaking in what sounded like Russian, his tone sharp and argumentative. She couldn't understand the words, but she understood the anger and frustration in his voice. When he finally came back to bed, hours later, he smelled of cigarette smoke, though she'd never seen him smoke. "Who are you talking to?" she asked, no longer able to pretend she'd been sleeping. He sighed deeply. "Sarah, I think it's time we had that conversation." Her heart raced as he led her downstairs to the living room, pouring them both generous glasses of whiskey despite the late hour. He sat across from her, his face grave in the dim lighting. "My real name is Marcus Chen," he began. "That part is true. But I'm not exactly an international consultant, at least not in the traditional sense." Sarah's hands gripped her glass so tightly she thought it might shatter. "Then what are you exactly?" "I work for a private intelligence firm that operates in the gray areas between governments. We gather information, facilitate negotiations, sometimes help people disappear when they need to. The multiple passports, the different identities, they're tools of the trade. I've been doing this for 15 years. "So you're a spy?" Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Not exactly. More like a freelance intelligence operative. I work for whoever pays me, as long as the job aligns with my personal code of ethics. I've helped journalists escape authoritarian regimes, facilitated peace negotiations between warring factions, and yes, sometimes helped criminals disappear if I believed they were being targeted unjustly." Sarah felt like the room was spinning. "And me, what am I to you? Part of a cover story? A convenient way to look like a normal couple?" "No," Marcus said firmly, moving to kneel in front of her. "You're the first real thing I've had in my life in over a decade. I met you and something shifted inside me. I realized I was tired of the lies, the constant moving, the loneliness of never being able to be myself with anyone. I brought you here because I want to start over with you, Sarah. I want to be just Marcus, not David or Marco or Martin. I want a normal life, and I want it with you." She wanted to believe him, but her legal training demanded skepticism. "Why leave Boston so suddenly?" "What are you running from?" He hesitated, and she knew the answer would be bad. "There's a Russian operative named Viktor Kozlov who believes I stole something from him during a job in Moscow 2 years ago. He's been tracking me, getting closer. I left because I didn't want you caught in the crossfire. This villa, Jordan, it's off the grid enough that I thought we'd be safe here while I figured out how to handle the situation." "What did you steal?" Sarah asked, though part of her didn't want to know. "Information about his organization's activities in Eastern Europe. I sold it to a European intelligence agency because what he was doing involved human trafficking. I don't regret it, but he's the kind of man who never forgets and never forgives." Sarah stood up, pacing the room as she processed everything. "You brought me to a supposedly safe house while being hunted by a Russian criminal?" "Marcus, I'm a corporate lawyer from Boston. I review contracts and negotiate deals. I don't deal with international espionage and dangerous operatives." "I know, and I'm sorry. I thought I could protect you, that we could just disappear here together. But I realize now that was selfish. Tomorrow, I'll put you on a flight back to Boston. You can tell your family you realized you'd made a mistake. Go back to your life. Forget you ever met me." But as Sarah looked at him, she realized she didn't want to go back. The life she'd left behind suddenly seemed unbearably small and predictable. Yes, Marcus had lied to her, but he'd also shown her a world beyond courtrooms and client meetings. He'd awakened a part of her that craved adventure and passion, and despite the danger, despite the deception, she wasn't ready to give that up. "I'm not going anywhere," she said finally. "But no more lies. If we're going to do this, if we're going to be together, I need complete honesty. About everything." Relief flooded Marcus's face. "I promise. Complete transparency from now on." Over the next week, Marcus began teaching Sarah the basics of his world. He showed her how to spot surveillance, how to communicate securely, how to create and maintain cover stories. It was like a crash course in espionage, and Sarah discovered she had a natural aptitude for it. Her legal training in analyzing details and reading people translated well to this new, dangerous world. She learned that the villa had multiple escape routes, hidden compartments with cash and weapons, and a panic room disguised as a wine cellar. Marcus introduced her to his contact network through encrypted channels, people with code names and no faces who could provide everything from fake documents to emergency extraction. But peace in their hidden paradise was short-lived. 2 weeks after their arrival, Sarah was shopping alone in the Dead Sea resort area when she noticed a man watching her from across the street. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a scar running down his left cheek. When their eyes met, he smiled in a way that made her blood run cold. She hurried back to the villa, her heart pounding, and told Marcus what she'd seen. His face went pale. "We need to leave, now, tonight. Was it Kozlov?" Sarah asked, already moving to pack. "Worse. That's Dmitry Volkov, one of Kozlov's enforcers. If he's here, Kozlov knows exactly where we are." They threw clothes and essentials into bags, moving with practiced efficiency. Marcus grabbed several of his passports and a briefcase Sarah had never seen before from the hidden compartment in his closet. "There's a boat arranged at the private marina. We'll go to Egypt, then Europe. We'll keep moving until I can negotiate with Kozlov." But as they loaded the car, headlights appeared at the end of the long driveway. Not one vehicle, but 3, moving fast. "Back door," Marcus commanded, grabbing Sarah's hand and pulling her through the villa. They ran through the kitchen and out onto the terrace, then down a steep path toward the Dead Sea shore. Behind them, Sarah heard doors slamming and men shouting in Russian. They reached a small dock where a speedboat was tied, and Marcus had them on the water within seconds, the powerful engine roaring to life. Bullets pinged off the boat's hull as they sped away into the darkness, and Sarah ducked low, her heart threatening to burst from her chest. This was insane. This was exactly the kind of situation her predictable Boston life had protected her from. Marcus steered expertly across the dark water, heading toward what he said was a landing spot in Israeli territory where Kozlov's men wouldn't follow. But as they approached the far shore, another boat appeared, cutting them off. Sarah recognized the scarred man from the resort town, standing at the helm, a gun pointed directly at them. "Kill the engine, Marcus," a heavily accented voice called across the water. "Mr. Kozlov just wants to talk." Marcus slowed the boat but didn't stop completely, his jaw clenched with tension. "I have nothing to say to Kozlov, but he has much to say to you, and to your pretty lawyer friend. Yes, we know all about Miss Sarah Mitchell. We know about her family's law firm, her apartment in Boston, her parents in Cape Cod. We know everything." The threat was clear, and Sarah felt ice in her veins. They'd researched her, which meant they could hurt her family to get to Marcus. "What does he want?" Marcus asked, finally cutting the engine. "A meeting. Tomorrow noon, at the Philadelphia Hotel in Amman. Come alone, and Miss Mitchell stays safe. Bring anyone else or try to run again, and we start with her mother." The boat with Volkov sped away, leaving them floating in the middle of the Dead Sea under a sky full of stars. Sarah was shaking, whether from cold, fear, or adrenaline she couldn't tell. "We have to call the police, the embassy, someone," she said desperately. Marcus shook his head. "We're in a complicated jurisdiction here, and Kozlov has connections everywhere. The police won't help, and involving the embassy would just make things worse. I need to meet with him, see what he actually wants. You can't go alone. It's obviously a trap." "Probably," Marcus agreed. "But if I don't show up, he'll make good on his threat against your family." "I won't let that happen, Sarah. You're in this mess because of me, and I'm going to get you out of it." They returned to the Jordanian shore at a different location, abandoning the boat and hiking to a small hotel in a town south of the Dead Sea resorts. Marcus paid cash for a room, and they spent the night making plans. Sarah insisted on being part of whatever happened next, and eventually Marcus agreed, though reluctantly. "There's something I haven't told you," he said as dawn broke through the hotel room's thin curtains. "The information I stole from Kozlov, it wasn't just about human trafficking. It also contained evidence of money laundering for several European politicians
and Middle Eastern arms dealers. I copied everything before selling it to the European agency. I've been holding on to it as insurance, but I never thought Kozlov would track me this far or this quickly." "So you have leverage," Sarah said, her legal mind immediately seeing the angle. "This is a negotiation, not an execution. He wants that information back, which means we have something he needs." "We?" Marcus asked with a slight smile. "When did this become we?" "When his goon threatened my mother," Sarah replied grimly. "Now it's personal." They spent the morning preparing, and Sarah found herself stepping fully into the world Marcus inhabited. She helped him plan contingencies, practiced her cover story, and even learned how to use the compact handgun he insisted she carry in her purse. By the time they drove to Amman, she felt simultaneously terrified and strangely alive in a way she'd never experienced in a courtroom. The Philadelphia Hotel was a grand establishment in downtown Amman, all marble and crystal chandeliers. Marcus had reserved a suite, and he'd arranged for several of his contacts to be positioned throughout the hotel, despite Kozlov's instruction to come alone. "I never follow instructions from people trying to kill me," he explained. At exactly noon, there was a knock on the suite door. Marcus opened it to reveal a man in his mid-50s, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, with silver hair and cold blue eyes. Viktor Kozlov looked more like a successful businessman than a dangerous criminal, which made him somehow more frightening. "Marcus Chun," he said in perfect English, strolling into the suite like he owned it. "Or should I call you David? Marco. You have so many names, it's hard to keep track." "Kozlov," Marcus acknowledged, not offering a handshake. "And this must be the lovely Sarah Mitchell," Kozlov said, turning his attention to her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "A corporate lawyer from Boston. I must say, you've traded quite a comfortable life for this chaos." "What do you want?" Sarah asked, channeling every ounce of courtroom confidence she possessed. Kozlov's eyebrows rose slightly, as if impressed by her directness. "Straight to business. I like that. What I want, Miss Mitchell, is what your boyfriend stole from me 2 years ago. All of it. Every copy, every backup, every piece of evidence he sold to those European bureaucrats." "And in exchange?" Marcus asked. "In exchange, you both live. You get to run off to wherever you'd like and play house, and I forget you exist. It's really quite simple." Sarah and Marcus exchanged a glance, communicating silently in the way people do when they've become deeply attuned to each other. "We want something too," Sarah said, surprising both men. "Immunity. Written guarantee that you and your organization will never come after either of us, or anyone connected to us, ever again. And proof that the human trafficking operations documented in those files have been permanently shut down." Kozlov laughed, a harsh sound that echoed in the elegant suite. "You're negotiating with me? Do you understand who I am?" "I understand exactly who you are," Sarah said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. You're a criminal who's smart enough to know that Marcus has distributed copies of that information with instructions to release it to every major news organization and law enforcement agency in the world if anything happens to him or me. You're also smart enough to know that the human trafficking evidence is the most damaging to your operation because it will bring attention you can't afford. So yes, I'm negotiating with you, because we both know you need this deal as much as we do. The room was silent for a long moment. Then Kozlov's face broke into a genuine smile. Marcus, where did you find this woman? She's extraordinary. He pulled out his phone and made a quick call in Russian, then showed them a video of a warehouse being raided by police. The trafficking operation was shut down 3 months ago when the heat became too intense. As for your immunity, I'm prepared to offer it, but I need proof that you'll actually deliver all the information. Marcus pulled out a laptop and showed Kozlov encrypted files, demonstrating that he had everything Kozlov wanted. They spent the next hour hammering out details, with Sarah effectively serving as the mediator, translating the world of international crime into terms she understood from corporate negotiations. By the end, they had an agreement. Marcus would turn over all the information in exchange for written immunity for himself, Sarah, and anyone connected to them, along with proof that the trafficking operations had been permanently dismantled. I must say, Kozlov remarked as he prepared to leave, you two make quite a team. Perhaps you found your calling, Miss Mitchell. After he left, Sarah collapsed onto the suite sofa, her entire body trembling with the release of adrenaline. Marcus sat beside her, pulling her close. That was either the bravest or most foolish thing I've ever seen, he said. I vote brave. I can't believe that worked, Sarah whispered. I can't believe I just negotiated with a Russian criminal. You were magnificent. You would have made a terrible spy because you're too honest, but you're a brilliant negotiator. Over the next few days, they finalized the exchange with Kozlov, using Sarah's legal expertise to ensure every detail was documented and verifiable. To her surprise, Kozlov kept his word, providing evidence that the trafficking operations were truly shut down and signing agreements that Marcus's contacts verified as legitimate. It was surreal, using her corporate law skills to broker a deal with an international criminal. But it worked. A week after the meeting, they were back at the villa, watching the sunset over the Dead Sea. But something had shifted between them. The excitement and passion that had brought them together now felt complicated by the reality of who Marcus was and what his life entailed. I need to ask you something, Sarah said, breaking a long silence. Those other passports, the other identities, are they all just tools? Or is there a part of you that doesn't know who you really are? Marcus was quiet for a long time. That's the question, isn't it? I've been so many people for so long that sometimes I don't know where the cover identities end and the real Marcus begins. But being with you these past months, I felt more like myself than I have in years. You've reminded me who I wanted to be before this life consumed me. Who did you want to be? Someone good. Someone who helped people. I got into this work because I believed in making a difference, but somewhere along the way, it became more about the thrill, the challenge, the adrenaline. You've shown me there's more to life than constantly running and hiding. Sarah turned to face him fully. I don't want to go back to Boston, Marcus. My life there feels small now, meaningless in a way it didn't before. But I also can't live like this, running from dangerous people, negotiating with criminals, never knowing if we're safe. We need to find something in between. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we create a new life together. Not in hiding, but not in the spotlight either. Maybe we settle somewhere neutral, somewhere we can both be ourselves. You quit the spy game. I don't go back to corporate law. We figure out who we are together, without all the lies and danger. Marcus smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. You make it sound so simple. It won't be simple, Sarah acknowledged. But it's possible. You have enough money saved from your jobs, and I have skills that can translate to anything from teaching to consulting. We could do this, Marcus. We could actually have a real life. They talked late into the night, planning a future that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. Marcus agreed to contact his remaining clients and formally retire from the intelligence world, burning his alternate identities and keeping only his real name. Sarah would help him create legitimate business ventures that could sustain them without the danger. 3 months later, they were living in Lisbon, Portugal, in a modest apartment overlooking the Tagus River. Marcus had started a legitimate consulting firm advising companies on international security, using his expertise in ways that didn't require fake passports or secret identities. Sarah was working with a Portuguese law firm specializing in international human rights cases, finally using her legal skills for something that felt meaningful. The transition wasn't easy. Marcus struggled with the monotony of legitimate work after years of high-stakes operations, and Sarah missed the intellectual challenges of corporate law more than she'd expected. They fought, they doubted their choices. They even separated briefly when Marcus took a job that skirted too close to his old life. But they always came back to each other, drawn together by something stronger than passion or convenience. They'd seen each other at their worst, scared, desperate, dishonest, and chosen to stay anyway. One evening, as they walked along the Lisbon waterfront watching the sunset paint the buildings gold and pink, Sarah realized this was what she'd been searching for all along. Not the excitement of escape or the danger of international intrigue, but the simple, profound intimacy of being fully known by another person and accepted anyway. "Do you miss it?" she asked Marcus, knowing he'd understand what she meant. "Sometimes," he admitted. "The clarity of it, the sense of purpose. But I don't miss the loneliness, or the constant lying, or looking over my shoulder. This life, with you, it's harder in some ways because it's real. There's no cover story to hide behind, no alternate identity to slip into when things get difficult. But it's also infinitely richer." They stood there on the riverbank as tourists and locals passed by, just two people among millions trying to figure out how to build a life together. Sarah thought about the woman who'd boarded that flight to Jordan, so desperate to escape her predictable existence that she'd ignored every warning sign. That woman seemed like a stranger now, someone naive and reckless who'd gotten incredibly lucky. "No regrets?" Marcus asked, reading her expression. Sarah looked at him, really looked at him, seeing not Marcus Chun or David Richardson or any of his other identities, but simply the complicated, flawed, fascinating man she'd chosen to love. "Only one," she said with a slight smile. "I wish you'd told me about the passport sooner. Would have saved us a lot of drama." He laughed, pulling her close. "Where's the fun in that?" As they walked home through Lisbon's winding streets, Sarah reflected on the strange journey that had brought them here. She'd escaped to Jordan with a man carrying multiple passports, and discovered that sometimes the most dangerous secrets are the ones we keep from ourselves. Marcus had been running from his true identity for so long that he'd forgotten who he really was, and she'd been hiding from her own desire for something more meaningful than professional success. They'd found each other at exactly the right moment, two people ready to stop running and start actually living. The passports that had represented his fragmented identity now sat in a safe deposit box in a Lisbon bank, artifacts of a life he'd left behind. Sarah sometimes wondered what would have happened if she'd never looked in his bag that day in Istanbul, if she'd discovered his secrets differently or not at all. But she'd learned that some questions have no satisfying answers, and some mysteries are better left unexplored. What mattered was who they chose to be now, in this moment. In this life, they were building together one honest conversation at a time. The Lisbon sky deepened to twilight as they climbed the hill to their apartment, and Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in her carefully planned Boston life. The profound, terrifying, exhilarating sensation of not knowing exactly what would come next, and being completely okay with that uncertainty. She'd escaped to Jordan looking for adventure and found something far more valuable: the courage to be exactly who she was, without apology or pretense, with a partner who understood that real intimacy means accepting all of someone's identities, especially the ones they're still discovering themselves.